All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that we are all living in their modern day spiritual paradise. Did you know? I'm your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the 70s and 80s. As I do, just a warning, we try to have fun here, try to heal, try to get some thought processes in motion. There's humor, experiences, and more, but it is never meant to offend. Thank you for being here. I'm going to just say from the outset that I'm going to get a little heavy this week. I guess I'm in a heavy mood and I've had some things on my mind and it's going to be a little bit heavy. And if you've got family inside Jehovah's Witnesses now, this might be the show for you. This might get some thoughts moving, and I'd certainly look and very much am looking forward to any kind of feedback from other folks. The journey out of Jehovah's Witnesses is very difficult. I know I'm stating the obvious here. Maybe you're here because you know something is wrong. You may have a beard now, but you also have a queasy feeling in your gut that just won't go away, and you can't quite identify why. We try to make this as comfortable as possible, at least in this show, so please know you're in a safe place. It's okay to have those feelings. No two people's journeys are the same in or out of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you're contemplating leaving an organization that has dominated every second of your life, it's scary. It's real scary. And I can't emphasize that enough. I liken it to the first time you let go of the side of the swimming pool. Remember that feeling when you're a kid? You're learning how to swim, you don't know how. You let go of the side of the pool and you find yourself out in open water. I got like butterflies in my stomach describing that. I must have trauma. Not a good swimmer, by the way. I liken it to the first time you let go of the side of the pool. That's what it's like when you leave Jehovah's Witnesses. And look, as I mentioned, I'm a bad swimmer. Some of us are really bad swimmers. But that feeling you got of not being safe, and the old phrase, sink or swim, yeah, it comes to mind almost instantly in that moment. And despite that initial feeling of panic that you had, you soon, I should say, learn that you can do it. And you can do this too. But leaving Jehovah's Witnesses just is not easy. All of that is to say that the same is true of leaving a high control religion that has completely hijacked your thinking, emotions, and time. No one said it would be easy because it won't. There's going to be pain, there's going to be tears, loneliness. I'm here to validate, been there, done that, and it's really like that same feeling you got when you let go of the poolside. It's fear. Fear that you're not safe. Fear of the unknown. And speaking purely from my own experience, I can only say that it will all change with time and determined effort to get educated. As I always do, please take the time to study who and what Jehovah's Witnesses are. Don't just accept the words of other people, including this unknown podcast host. You must decide to know the truth about the truth. It really is personal. The journey can be scary, but I'm here to tell you that it's also very much worth it, and I know I'm not alone. I left the organization about 15 years ago, and I spent, as I've shared, years studying and traveling the world looking for answers, including multiple trips back to New York, the Mecca of Jehovah's Witnesses. I went to the grave sites, I examined public records, and I reached the moment where I realized I had been raised in a cult. I had what I think is a fairly common response at that point. I need to tell everyone that this is all a lie. That's right, there's a lot of emotions. I know that you've probably experienced them as well. When people noticed that I was drifting away from the organization, they would call me. And I had the typical reaction, I must save them from it all. And gee, I wonder where I learned that from. Who taught me that? Saving everyone from it all. I was like an emotional fire hydrant shooting waters of truth at anyone that would listen. Folks, it doesn't work. And I know there are probably many of us listening who have wanted to save everyone from the obvious inside Jehovah's Witnesses, and we went at it entirely the wrong way. It doesn't work with anyone. And I soon realized that. I can do this. I can get them to wake up. But then came an internal question, a question that I continue to get from so many people today when it comes to their trapped family members or loved ones inside the org. And that question is this: should I wake them up? In particular, should an ex-Jehovah's Witness try to wake up a current older Jehovah's Witness, an elderly Jehovah's Witness, someone who spent their entire life inside that organization? And this is a question that has haunted me for many years. And I'm encouraging everyone who's ever contemplated that question, should I try to wake them up, to just sit with it for a minute. I know what my knee-jerk answer was to that question. Well, of course, I need to wake up my family. I need to wake up my mother. But should you? Look, we're getting into sensitive territory. I told you it was going to be heavy, and the answer isn't as easy as it seems. It just isn't. I know that there are many people who have contemplated that question and are possibly living with it right now. There is so much more to consider than just shattering their illusion that Noah really did capture stray hippos or lose his virginity at 500 years old. There he is. Or that the kid you used to babysit was appointed as an elder by Holy Spirit and angels at last night's meeting. Or that standing in front of book carts is somehow considered teaching or preaching. Or that 9 guys in upstate New York recently received a message directly from Jesus Christ himself, giving men permission to grow hair on their chin. There is so much more to consider. Should you wake people up to this? There is no question that you can wake people up. You can share the truth about Jehovah's Witnesses with anyone and everyone that'll listen. But again, that isn't the question I'm posing here. And I really wish this was a two-way conversation, a discussion. The question here is, should you? And I want to especially apply this to older Jehovah's Witnesses. Those that are elderly, older than any of us listening, don't care by how much, and whether or not you should try to wake them up. And as you can see, I really want to explore each and everyone's opinions on this, all the while validating that none of us can fully understand each other's circumstances. We have officially strayed into what I call a moral question. And I might also add a very emotional question. And I hope I'm going to express my thoughts well. I'm all over the board. I'm trying to make this more conversational from my end because I would love to see how and if anyone else is dealing with this. But in all honesty, I have no idea if I'm making sense or not. So hopefully you're along for the ride. We're right back to random thoughts with Stacy, including my ongoing fascination with time, because time plays a role in that question of whether you should try to wake up an older person. But allow me to explain for a minute. I know I'm long-winded. How is it different to try to wake someone up that is young or new to Jehovah's Witnesses, or even a child, versus trying to wake up an older Jehovah's Witness whose entire life has been spent in service to a publishing real estate company in upstate New York? Why is it different to try to wake up an elderly person whose entire personality, including their hopes and their dreams, are tied up in a fantasy that they have been nurturing for decades by attending weekly meetings, conventions, and reading literature that reinforces it all in their mind and heart? How has it impacted their brains? How they think and feel? How they see colors? How they move through life? You got it, everything. How is it different? And once you come to an answer, it only raises another, if not other, questions. And the question I personally, bearing my own soul here, have tortured myself with for a good 15 years since I left the org. And this is it. Let me lay the foundation. This is it. Based on their time, the older Jehovah's Witness, someone that we may love or know, you know that I'm leaning into very likely our parents or grandparents, based on their time left on this planet, is it really loving to take it all away? I think you see where I'm going with this. The answer just isn't easy, is it? And so many of us are faced with this when we leave Jehovah's Witnesses, especially those of us who, again, have elderly parents or grandparents that have always been in the organization among the happiest people on earth. It's almost like we default to the cliche JW question we all heard as kids. Well, what's the loving thing to do, Stacy? Remember that one? Some of most elders' greatest tool in their tool bag. When they don't have an answer, well, what's the loving thing to do? And so I'm going to apply it to this. And with that, we're officially in pretty uneasy territory, like letting go of the poolside. Take a walk with me through an emotional minefield. Again, while some of this is true for any religious person, any religion, this little show's about Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to get out in front of those comments I'm going to receive in reference to whether you should wake someone up to the reality of their belief system. I think it's important to understand how an older Jehovah's Witness is impacted by their religion. I've alluded to it and will continue to because I'm working it out. I'm sure you will see some of this in those that you love the most, especially, again, elderly parents that are still practicing Jehovah's Witnesses. And as we dig into how this organization has impacted all of us, please again focus in on how it continues to strangle older ones that are still inside. There's a lot to dive into here, so I'm going to highlight some of the most important points from my perspective. As if we didn't know how deeply embedded the JW lifestyle is on them already, take a look at the facts as a result of years of intensive study that come from the Stanford Culture and Emotion Lab, printed online, chapter 14, page 274, titled The Religious Shaping of Feeling, Implications of Affect Valuation Theory. I know, I told you it was going to be heavy, by Dr. Jean Tsai and several other contributing doctors. The study says this, quote, over 80% of the world population identifies with a specific religion. For some individuals, this religion structures and shapes every dimension of their daily lives. What they wear, with whom they spend time, where they go, and what they eat. As important, but perhaps less overt, is how religion shapes people's psyches. Indeed, one of the major functions of religion is to provide followers with a way of understanding and coping with their life circumstances. Another is to provide a guide or map for how to lead a good life. A central part of coping with life and leading a good life is regulating one's emotions. Indeed, several religious scholars have written about the centrality of emotion in religious experience. End quote. Does any of that sound familiar to you as it did to me? If you're one of those ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who is still fortunate enough, and it's very rare anymore, to have a relationship with a still dedicated Jehovah's Witness parent, friend, or loved one, you recognize all those patterns that the doctors were speaking of. In fact, all of us once practiced these things. In my opinion, Jehovah's Witnesses are a high control cult, no secret where I sit, which only supports the facts from the study that I just shared. But I think those facts are on steroids when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. How to dress, how to eat, who to hang around with. Yeah. And those are people that we love, still trapped inside, especially older ones who are continuing to loyally serve the 9 guys in upstate New York. How is this impacting their life and who they are? You no doubt noticed something that may have triggered your own sense of compassion and empathy, and I'm here for it. That's a good thing. They concluded where they said, quote, religion provides followers with a way of understanding and coping with their life circumstances. In other words, for a lifelong Jehovah's Witness, now moving into old age or already there, this is their very soul. It's who they are. They do nothing in their life without first consulting the voices in their head that is telling them how to think or what to do or how to dress or what to eat or how to feel about what they just saw. Every single thing that they have encountered in their long life. Now imagine that's who you are as a person, these people, those loved ones, the elderly. Imagine taking that all away from a person, and I'm not talking about a young person or a new Bible study, but from someone who has spent a lifetime inside that organization, who has made every decision believing that one day they would be in paradise, they'd live in paradise. Imagine it. Think about it. Sit with it. How does your gut feel? I think I know the answer. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this, right? Many of us struggle with it, and I get a lot of private messages asking what to do with this. And so let's consider this slowly. And I'm in no way trying to get anyone to conclude on whether they should wake up an older Jehovah's Witness that they love. I'm just simply throwing some things out for consideration, things I myself have been thinking about. But what would you be taking away from someone who is up against life's clock? Consider what an elderly Jehovah's Witness, maybe it's your mother or father, it is in my case. Consider what they're desperately hanging on to as they cope with getting older in this system of things and with everything life is throwing at them in general. From the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, we get this, quote, this grand hope of release from the grip of old age and death gives great encouragement to older persons in these trying times. For example, a woman in Florida who began examining the Bible's promises after her husband's death said that the hope of her husband's resurrection was what really interested her in God's new order. That comforting hope helped to sustain her in her grief and gave her the best reason for living. Think of it. The day is dawning when older folks will see the aging process reversed with fewer and fewer wrinkles as time passes. Eyesight will be restored so they can throw away their eyeglasses. Hearing will improve too so they can get rid of hearing aids. Infirmities will be eliminated so they can walk without a cane. And on top of all of that, they will be able to welcome back to life dead loved ones. End quote. From the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses to older Jehovah's Witnesses. And you might have noticed I didn't give the reference. That reference is from page 15 of the Awake magazine, June 22nd, 1979. 45 years ago. For those that initially got that in 79, I was 12. Yeah, some time has passed in what they've taught those people. But how about another example of what our parents or elderly Jehovah's Witnesses are hanging on to? Quote, another thing is also very noticeable under the New World Government. The general health of the people appears to be getting better all the time. There is no mistaking this. The health of the obedient subjects of the world government is really improving. Why, aches and pains are vanishing. Wrinkles are disappearing from once worried or time-worn faces. Even those bent over from weakness and old age are gradually straightening up and walking with graceful erectness. Odd sentence. Quote, all around us there are signs that the persons of advanced years are returning to the days of their youth. Evidently, everyone is enjoying the privilege of living, and each new day is greeted with thankfulness for the added day of life. Bodily infirmity is not increasing as time goes on. Physical forces are building up, and the bodies are not wearing out. Whatever the medicine it is that the world government is administering, its medical aid is producing wonders. It will finally bring human perfection. End quote. That dream sequence, given to Jehovah's Witnesses and encouraged for them to find themselves drowning in, let yourself drift away to all these things, can be found in the book Our Incoming World Government, God's Kingdom, pages 8 through 9, paragraph 7, published in January 1977, 47 years ago. You see, a Jehovah's Witness at any age, but particularly those that have held on to these escapist dream sequences, these fantasies, who are now elderly, and elderly, JW, again, including those we love the most, have been exposed to a steady diet of this stuff. It has shaped who they are. It is the very bricks that build the walls between you and them, because you left the organization, and they must faithfully continue on, setting the example. Just know that when an older Jehovah's Witness hurts, they revert to this. They revert to that stuff. When they feel joy, they revert to this stuff. When they are depressed, sad, anxious, lonely, broke, whatever it might be, it always comes back to this stuff. For those we one time trusted with our lives, parents, grandparents, whatever it might be, we now, in our own maturity, recognize the patterns. Once you leave the organization, you're driven mad watching those that you love give into this stuff, give into the spell. It's obviously easier to see once you're free. We all would admit that. And might I add, you are a younger person, technically. Time is on your side or on our side. Is it really on theirs? How does all of this happen? First, it's more than just applying what they've heard at the Kingdom Hall for decades. It's much more than that. Much more has been used to create the grip that the Jehovah's Witness leadership, the governing body, has on their people. From that same study from Stanford on effect valuation theory, we're told this, quote, as suggested previously, religions teach us how to feel or not feel through religious products, texts, icons, and relics. Although no empirical work has yet compared religious relics in terms of their emotional content, Kieschnick, a doctor in the study, argues that religious statues, paintings, art, and architecture are designed to trigger emotion. We believe that they may play an even greater role in modeling ideal affective states. For example, as much as the image of Buddha may elicit calm, it may also remind Buddhists that calm is the ideal way to feel. Indeed, practitioners may turn to religious relics and icons to remind themselves about how they should feel, especially during times of deep anxiety and uncertainty. Affect valuation theory also predicts that whereas cultural ideas and practices shape how people actually feel, they shape how people want to feel even more. Sound familiar? Whether or not people are able to achieve their ideal states depends on a host of factors, such as temperaments, ability to regulate emotions, cultural engagement, or a combination of these factors. This may seem obvious, but in everyday life, people are often surprised when a clergyman, a monk, or any other devoutly religious person is accused or convicted of some morally reprehensible crime. End quote for a moment. Certainly something those of us that have left Jehovah's Witnesses can relate to with former relationships with elders, what's going on with child safety, etc. Back to the article, quote, "This may be because we expect devoutly religious people, especially religious leaders, to think, behave, and feel in ways that are consistent with their religious ideals. However, as predicted by the model, religious cultures may shape how people want to feel more than how they actually feel." End quote. Heavy stuff. That is a truly heavy, heavy conclusion when applied to Jehovah's Witnesses. This certainly doesn't play a role on Watchtower illustrations, in Jehovah's Witness broadcasting videos, or books showing loyal Jehovah's Witnesses jumping from graves and holding older family members in their arms, right? It all looks so encouraging, so powerful, and those that are inside have been exposed to this for decades. We also know that in recent times, just talked about it, they've mixed in music videos that include old people growing young right before our eyes if they just continue to be a Jehovah's Witness. We even saw Sophia from the Caleb and Sophia videos hugging the older sister in her congregation who stayed loyal to the organization and was then resurrected as a young, beautiful woman. And Sophia says it's one of the things she looks most forward to. And she's saying this as a child who's looking forward to the coming paradise earth. Imagine years of conditioning to believe in that. As the researcher stated in the study, religious statues, paintings, art, and architecture are designed to trigger emotion. End quote. It plays out weekly for those that we love inside Jehovah's Witnesses, most especially the older ones. If they just hold on, if they finish the race for life, if they endure till the end, if they count their blows, we all know these phrases that a Jehovah's Witness is exposed to. They will have all of this. They will have the paradise. They'll have the dream sequence, the governing body put to print in 77, wrinkles disappearing, people coming back to life. And you're left in the painful position of pondering whether or not you want to shatter their entire world by simply telling them the truth. And there's that question. Should you? Remember, this is mostly about emotions. Their emotions are involved. Years and years of conditioning those emotions. In fact, if we're being really honest about it, it's almost always all that is involved. It's the reason so many Jehovah's Witnesses don't study. This makes them feel good to just know. But our older ones that we may care about and love inside this organization are constantly hit with the message to ignore anything to the contrary. Even considering it is a sin. And the idea of holding on for dear life to all they've ever known is constantly reinforced. We all went to the meetings, we went to the conventions, we can see it what they're doing now. When we try to wake them up, there is always the danger that they will revert right back to those years of conditioning. The message inside this religion, this cult, has always been the same, whether you're young or old. Looking at the Watchtower of September 15th, 1989, pages 4 through 7, the article, "What Must We Do to Be Saved?" No worries, you don't have to build an ark. It says this, quote, "Yes, there are various things involved in getting saved. We must take in accurate knowledge of God's purposes and His way of salvation. Then we must exercise faith in the chief agent of salvation, Jesus Christ, and do God's will the rest of our lives. Salvation is sure for those who follow this course. Note this, but it involves persevering right to the end of our present life or of this system of things. Only he that has endured to the end is the one that will be saved. End quote. You see, any older one you may be considering for a good wake up or a shake, they have been taught that they need to hang on until the bitter end. And they've already been hanging on for decades in some cases. Isn't this question insanely complex? I'm consistently reminded, or I'm talking about emotion, my feelings on this are that it is incredibly complex. There are so many things to consider, not the least of which is you don't want them to live a lie. You love them immensely. They're so special to you. Your own conditioning in telling the truth in any and all circumstances. It all comes into play should I wake them up. There's so many things to consider, not the least of which is our efforts to wake up an older person almost immediately triggers their brains into thinking, guess what? We are now an enemy. The exact thing we don't want to do. We don't want to sever the relationship. They've got shunning in place for that. But some people disobey it. And do you really want to risk ending the relationship? So many complex things to think about for just telling someone the truth. But I want to take a minute. I want to go back to this idea of emotion and how a longtime Jehovah's Witness has been conditioned. I want to hammer this home. I want to overdo it. It almost immediately shows all of us that trying to match emotion with emotion in an effort to free someone's mind is often completely futile. I present to you an example that oddly, and I do mean oddly, traces right back to 1898 and a guy named Edward Thorndike. Familiar to anyone? Isn't it odd that what I'm about to share was realized just a few years after Jehovah himself looked down here at the earth and he decided Charles Taze Russell would be his faithful slave? He'd get the real truth kicked off. Is it a coincidence? 1870s, 1898? I'll let you be the judge. But back to Edward Thorndike. If you're not familiar with him, a brief history that leads to something most Jehovah's Witnesses will recognize in many ways. Quote, in 1898, American psychologist Edward Thorndike proposed the law of effect, which formed the basis of operant conditioning. Thorndike conducted experiments to discover how cats learn new behaviors. His work involved monitoring cats as they attempted to escape from puzzle boxes. The puzzle box trapped the animals until they moved a lever or performed an action which triggered their release. Thorndike ran several trials and recorded the time it took for them to perform the actions necessary to escape. He discovered that the cats seemed to learn from a trial and error process rather than insightful inspections of their environment. The animals learned that their actions led to an effect, and the type of elements of what would become known as operant conditioning. Enter B.F. Skinner. Now it might be ringing a bell. B.F. Skinner expanded upon Thorndike's existing work. Skinner theorized that if a behavior is followed by a reward, that behavior is more likely to be repeated, but added that if it is followed by some sort of punishment, it is less likely to be repeated. He introduced the word reinforcement into Thorndike's law of effect. Through his experiments, Skinner discovered the law of operant learning, which included extinction, punishment, and generalization. End quote. And for those that recognize the names and the project, yes, the Skinner box, which is defined as this. Skinner created the operant conditioning chamber as a variation of the puzzle box originally created by Edward Thorndike. While Skinner's early studies were done using rats, He later moved on to study pigeons. The operant conditioning chamber may be used to observe or manipulate behavior. An animal is placed in the box where it must learn to activate levers or respond to light or sound stimuli for reward. End quote. The Skinner box. I think many of us will be familiar with it. And it's only my opinion, but I have long believed that Jehovah's Witnesses live in some twisted form of a giant Skinner box. Before you rip the rug out from under someone you love, who still thinks Stephen Lett is a kingly type or can't explain why Toni Morris disappeared, consider how they've been conditioned. You're not just stating what is obvious to those of us free of this organization. You're literally dismantling everything they believe themselves to be. And that includes what their future is. From the Watchtower of 1958, October 15th, page 614, we're told this, quote, "As for humans upon earth, on the side of Jehovah will be all those fully dedicated to him and who are faithfully following Jesus Christ. Compared with earth's billions, these are indeed few. On Satan's side will be all the rest of mankind, more than 99.9%. End quote. Thank you, Watchtower. And there's one brick in the foundation of a Jehovah's Witness who's been associated for a long period of time. They're elite. They're special. They make up the 0.01% that get to live forever in paradise. Everybody else is under Satan's control. And they're fed this, and they're rewarded or not rewarded depending on their decisions inside their giant Skinner box. This impacts those that are associated on any level, but really especially those that have been for decades, older people, our parents, grandparents. From the Watchtower of 2016, the June Study Edition, page 26, those Jehovah's Witnesses, especially those exposed for decades, are told this, quote, "To leave Jehovah's organization, we would lose not only the privilege of doing God's will, but also the hope of life in God's new world." End quote. The message is clear. This is what those that we love are holding on to. Does anyone listening know someone that has been associated with Jehovah's Witnesses since 1958? Or that lived until 2016? That span is 58 years just between those two references. 58 years of belief, of decisions, of strict obedience. I ask you, and I'm sincerely curious, what would it feel like to them if they knew that all of it was a lie? That they had wasted their entire lives on a man-made fantasy? If you were to wake them up and share with them that fact, I ask, will they recover and enjoy what is left of their lives? Do we know? It truly is a difficult question and a difficult decision as to whether you decide to pour out all you've learned upon those that are older than you and still inside. The governing body has made sure that this avalanche of emotion is joined by many others. Consider, too, that you're standing there trying to tell a parent, we'll just use that as an example, that the religion is a lie. Even as the parent is not only fighting off logic, they themselves, being intelligent people, may be dealing with feelings of doubt, no matter what it is, fighting off logic, but also trying to navigate what is the painful emotions of now thinking that you, their child, their nephew, their close friend, that you are now an enemy, not only of them trying to deceive them, but also of God himself. And they may be in their closing seconds with talking to you because, well, despite you being their child or a family member or a dear friend and loving you immensely, that same elderly Jehovah's Witness is also dealing with the emotions of knowing or believing in how your story ends. In the Watchtower of 1977, June 1st, page 345, a Jehovah's Witness since 1977, but much earlier, believes this, quote, "In the near future, this generation will see the foretold great tribulation that will bring an end to this present wicked system. At that time, none of Jehovah's faithful servants, the only ones surviving, will mourn over the destruction of the wicked. To the contrary, they will rejoice, even as Moses and his people rejoiced at the destruction of Pharaoh and his army." End quote. Please sit with this for a minute. You want to wake a parent up. You want them to know what you want, what you know. You want them to understand why you've left. They believe this. Not only are they dealing with the natural emotions of losing you in any capacity, but the governing body tells them that they should rejoice when David Splain brandishes his bow and arrow and kills you right in front of them at Armageddon. And I got to tell you, my mind immediately drifted to Moses celebrating Jehovah killing firstborn baby boys in Egypt. Well, what'd they do? Throw a rave out in the parking lot? Rejoice. Were the Israelites handing out high fives, dancing? But listen, the application is right there. For a modern day Jehovah's Witness, the message is consistently shared to them. All they have to do is remain loyal, and all of this goes away, putting those elderly people who are still serving the organization in what is essentially a constant state of flight or fight. There it is. I know for many of us it's the obvious, but again, in a jumbled effort to capture all that is involved with the simple decision to just wake someone up that you love, particularly an older person in Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe this is stuff that everyone should consider. For any older tenured Jehovah's Witness that you may approach to wake up, they immediately revert to the messaging to get relief, to relieve the pain, the anxiety that they're feeling. They look for the button to push in the Holy Spirit Skinner box, so to speak. They want the reward. They don't want the misery. Would you like one such example that has long intrigued me? This one doesn't come from the literature, but from the Bible itself. And it's a scripture I'd love to expend many, many more hours exploring because I think it deserves it. But it is highly quoted by the governing body. And this one always left me feeling a little uneasy, insecure, a little doubtful. It comes to us from Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 3 of the New World Translation, which says, quote, "Seek Jehovah, all you meek ones of the earth, who observe his righteous decrees. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. Probably you will be concealed on the day of Jehovah's anger." End quote. Wait a minute here. Wait a minute. In the words of Lloyd Christmas from Dumb and Dumber, obviously already doomed due to his pagan last name, so you're telling me there's a chance? You're telling me there's a chance. Nothing gives you confidence as a Jehovah's Witness, whether young or old, when looking down fireballs and earthquakes from Jesus, Judge Joe, and Mark Sanderson, like a well-placed, well, probably will save you. Probably. I mean, a Jehovah's Witness is feeling better already. Probably. But the point is that if you're trying to wake up an older Jehovah's Witness, someone who spent decades in service to this religion, they immediately revert back to these types of verses in the Bible. And if that doesn't work, they can always rely on the 9 kings in New York to provide them with a real world experience that encourages them personally to never give up. Remember, you're trying to get them to wake up. At least you've made that decision. They immediately trigger this type of stuff. The reminder to never listen, to never even contemplate how much of their lives they've been wasting. Would you like that example? It comes to us from the Watchtower of 1974, September 1st. Pages 534 through 539 has the article, "By Faithfulness Keep Living." And it relates this just unbelievable experience. Here we go. Quote, "One congregation, for example, had the joy of observing the faithful endurance of a pioneer brother in his 90th year. He was serving as the field overseer besides and was in constant attendance at the meetings." End quote. What are they trying to promote there? He's 90, you lazy ass. Get to meeting. Back to the quote. "After devoting 58 years and telling others the good news of the kingdom, how happy he was to see the results of his work. Some of his own letters of recommendation serving along with him in the same congregation. If you will regularly go to the Kingdom Hall, in time, you too will become personally acquainted with some of those who are tenaciously hanging on to the thread of life. Persons who are using the twilight of their lifetime in praising their grand creator and in helping others to know his name and purpose. They are persons who continue on giving of their little strength as day by day they live their lives out in faithfulness, even until death. One witness, expressing how she felt about growing old and becoming sick, regretted that she was getting to be a little forgetful and had a hard time keeping up with younger witnesses of Jehovah. But such ones can be comforted with the knowledge that they are continuing to be an example of faith and endurance for younger ones to follow." End quote. Nothing speaks to a Jehovah's Witness and their endless sense of urgency like relating a real-world experience. One that no one can corroborate, as if it matters. This guy was 90 years old in 1974. He had spent 58 years circling the block in a minivan, leaving watchtowers under his neighbors' welcome mats. It speaks to how much this man gave to this organization. Even as they admit, in their own words, quote, tenaciously hanging on to the thread of life. And in the spirit of this episode, who wants to volunteer to be the one to tell him it's all a lie? Who wants to wake him up? Take a moment and picture how that conversation might go with a 90-year-old man. At this point, he was 90 years old and held up as an exemplary Jehovah's Witness, a person that they want the rest of us to emulate. This is what those older ones that we love, that we desperately want to wake up, will tap into as you try to tell them the truth. There's also the matter of sunk cost fallacy. The reality that older Jehovah's Witnesses have spent a lifetime in this organization. If you're not familiar with that term, and I think most of us probably are, the Oxford Language Dictionary defines sunk cost fallacy as the phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they have invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. End quote. Ooh. Sunk cost fallacy is a real weapon of the governing body. And they use it against those that we love. They bought into it. So much time you can't get back. Most older ones you see in any congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses have been there for decades. That's not going to be true in the future. Younger people are leaving this organization in droves. This is a unique set of generations. But if you go to one now and you see those older ones, they've been sitting in that kingdom hall for decades. They need this whole paradise earth thing to be real, even if some of them suspect at the gut level that it isn't. And again, who wants to tell them the truth? Who wants to wake them up? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm presenting the question. Even for the longtime J-dubs who suspect something is off or are starting to notice things they don't like, they've invested everything in this organization. I think it's very, very important to consider how deep this may run in someone you love that's a Jehovah's Witness. For those that aren't Jehovah's Witnesses anymore, or were only exposed to witnesses as an adult, it can be really difficult to understand why someone can't just snap out of it. Just snap out of it. It's obviously false. For those free of all those cognitive trappings, you desperately, I'm right there with you, want to free everyone you love from its grip, from the only dynamic they've ever been a part of in most cases. But let's call it what it is. You're literally shattering their whole world. And that doesn't even include the risk, I have mentioned it briefly, of shunning. If they decide that your effort to wake them up is truly evil, they'll shun you. This isn't anything new to someone that has already decided to leave. We made the decision. We've been healing. We know what all of this feels like. But for someone older than us, again, like a parent that's still in, by waking them up, you literally risk erasing their entire life, their world. All the memories, all the sacrifices. So when considering whether you should wake up an elderly JW, it really is a super heavy question. It's so heavy. Have you put any thought to some of the impact this will have? What does the rest of their golden years look like if they finally learn the truth about the truth? Can they personally, emotionally, physically handle the emotions of having their entire belief system obliterated? A system that may have been in place for some of them since they were little kids. So in the spirit of overemphasizing this episode, the question is, should you wake up an older Jehovah's Witness? And I've stayed away from it for long enough, but many of us know or are related to that beautiful soul inside Jehovah's Witnesses that can't tell you a single name on the governing body. You got a family member like that? You love them immensely. They're in, they're dedicated, but they don't know anything. They can't tell you who's on the governing body. They can't tell you where to find popular Bible verses. They never average more than an hour or two a month at service. They don't know what an overlapping generation is or where to find ancient Babylon on a map. You know why they're there? Those folks, some of those of whom we love, they're there because they love people. And you know what? As silly as it sounds, they love animals. They love fuzzy little animals. They've loved them their whole life. Who else told them they could have animals? The entire kingdom as pets. Those folks we love, some of them they rarely witness. They rarely witness. They don't preach, but they also don't celebrate their birthday. They don't read the magazines regularly, but they give the little people hugs and candy at the Kingdom Hall, and the kids love them. They ignore that counsel on worldly people. And then they go have coffee with the next door neighbor because they're really nice people. Do you know someone like that in your current or former congregation? An older one? I got to tell you, I can think of several. Two older sisters come to mind. You're so fond of them and they're such good people. But you have left or are leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. And now you're thinking of them and you're contemplating telling them that the vision they've been holding on to was created by some bad guys and that they will never be young again. It's highly likely they'll never see dead loved ones again. They're not going to frolic and have pet lions. There's a very good chance that they don't know who they are without that organization. And so again, I ask, in the spirit of conversation, should you tell them? If you thought I'd reached a conclusion, think again. Honestly, there's no easy answers to that question. That's what got me talking about it. With each person being one of a kind, with each situation or family dynamic being unique from any other, it's difficult to know if a concerted effort to wake up an older loved one inside Jehovah's Witnesses will actually do more harm than it would good. You might be sensing my own opinion, at least as of today, and that's all it is. That's all it is, my opinion. It's probably bled through a bit here. But the question is still should. What's to gain? If they're elderly and hanging on to the visions taught to them by Jehovah's Witnesses, how much time will it take those precious people to both accept all those lost years, that it was all a lie, and to heal? They're old. They're elderly. I concluded some years ago that the entire JW experience is a form of escapism. I'm sure you're familiar with the term. Psychologists have identified that a person's spiritual philosophy can become a way to avoid reality, and this is called spiritual bypassing. That was new to me. According to Dr. Simon Kazar, hope I'm saying that right, doctor, he said, quote, "The term spiritual bypassing describes when we use our spiritual beliefs or practices to avoid or escape from dealing with difficult emotions or personal problems. This could be when we use spirituality as a way to rationalize or justify an avoidance of emotional pain, as well as using spiritual practices as a means of avoiding responsibility or accountability for our actions." End quote. Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses. No need to better themselves with education or a plan for retirement or to deal with the many, many other challenges life throws at them, because after all, everything's just going to be a paradise, and it'll be here any minute. So full disclosure here. Personally, I continue to face this question with my own dear mother, as well as other former close Jehovah's Witness friends that I run into from time to time, one of which was just recently. And it's an ongoing question to myself, and I'm sharing it with you, and it's a journey for me personally. The thought of shattering the dreams of someone who is up against the clock in life, well, it's a different conversation than it is with a younger person who's exposed to this religion. So I'm leaving this whole thing open-ended. It's not a cop-out. I'm leaving it open-ended. And I'm hoping it generates discussion. And listen, I know that this will conjure up feelings, likely in those who are pure at heart. I know it may even be controversial. But for me, right now, today, in 2024, depending on the situation and the person, I flip the script. I've tend to look at that person just like a little person that believes in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. I let those older Jehovah's Witnesses that I encounter that are still kind to me or will speak with me, including those that I love the most on this world, to be honest, look, I let them hold on to their dream. I think this will change in the future. It's inevitable. I too am a work in progress 15 years later. I've decided that for most older ones, getting them to see the truth at an advanced age might not be kind at all. That for most of those elderly Jehovah's Witnesses, their heart was in the right place from the beginning. And now they're old. The author Tim O'Brien once said, quote, "Fantasy has a dark side to it. It also has a light hemisphere. The power of the human imagination to keep going, to imagine a better tomorrow." End quote. I might be wrong, but for those older people that I love who can't get back the time, I'm letting them have their utopia because I want them. I want to thank you for joining me this week. Looking forward to anyone and everyone's thoughts, wherever you may be. Be well.